Our speaker is Dave Randall. He's a musician and a political activist. He's played with Faithless, Sinead O'Connor, among others. And he's also recently written this book, Sound System, The Political Power of Music. Dave will speak for around 30 minutes, and then once he's done, we'll open up for debate, discussion, and questions. And then there'll be time for Dave to come back at the end. So without further ado.
Thank you, Emma. Thanks to all of you for deciding to come to this particular meeting. I know it's always stiff competition at Marxism, so thank you very much for coming along to hear what I have to say. And actually I want to say a big thank you to Marxism, the festival itself, because actually many of the ideas that found their way into the book were ideas that came about in part because of all sorts of conversations that I've had over the years at previous Marxism. So I want to say a massive thank you to Marxism Festival, all the members of the team, and to everyone who organises Marxism. It's great to be back here again introducing the book. Comrades, anyone who wants to change the world must begin by answering two questions. The first was most famously posed by Marvin Gaye, and the second by Lenin. What's going on and what is to be done? Now, what appears to be going on is a process of political polarisation, the like of which I don't think I've seen before in my adult lifetime. It seems that millions of people all around the world are starting to question and indeed to reject the old so-called centre ground in politics, what actually is much more accurately described as the old neoliberal consensus. They're rejecting that and they're casting around for different ideas. Now, not only the Jeremy Corbyn phenomenon here in Britain, but also the enthusiasm that greeted Bernie Sanders' campaign last year in America, Jean-Luc Mélenchon recently in France, Podemos in Spain, Syriza when they were first elected in Greece. All of these examples suggest that there is a huge potential audience for left-wing ideas. But where the left aren't making gains, or sometimes in parallel with those gains, very often the populist right and sometimes the far right are, which is very worrying. So what is to be done? Well, of course, there are many things that can and must be done to ensure that the progressive side of this process of polarisation wins out. All sorts of things that must be done in order to ensure that we deliver a better world to future generations. In a sentence, it's incumbent on all of us to get stuck into the fight for a better world. Now, what I argue in the book is that one of the battlegrounds in this fight is culture. Because I think that the images that surround us, the stories that we hear, and the music that we experience, I think that these things have a significant impact on the way that we feel about ourselves, each other, and the world that we share. We can have music which distracts us from the things that matter, that stirs up sort of tribalistic enmity, that marches us off to fight unnecessary and unjust wars. Or we can have music that invites a broad range of people to come together with a spirit of celebration. It can give people some hope and some confidence and an expanded sense of what's possible. So after 2 decades, really, of my life as a professional musician, mainly a touring guitar player, after 2 decades of living this life, I decided that it was high time for me to try to really unravel and get to grips with this mysterious political power that I believe music has. And the result is the book. Now, the book most certainly isn't an academic book. In fact, I've tried to make it as entertaining and as accessible as possible to the general reader. But you lot here at the Marxism Festival, you should know that the book is influenced, that many of the ideas are influenced by the great Italian Marxist Antonio Gramsci. What I take from Gramsci is the idea that all of culture is politically contested. Now, That's not to say that every single piece of music is politically contested in the same way or to the same degree. You know, a very difficult piece of avant-garde music, a bit of Schoenberg, to name Theodor Adorno's favourite 20th century composer. A bit of Schoenberg is less likely to be incorporated by McDonald's for a TV ad, less likely than a piece of kind of schmaltzy Americana, you know. But nonetheless, if you have any success at all with a piece of music, if you make some music which resonates with a mass audience, then different people will try to pull its meaning in different directions according to their different agendas. The ruling class will do what they can in a variety of ways to position what you've done, or indeed different artists, they'll do what they can to position these things in such a way that they are seen to be supporting the values and the ideas of the ruling class, seen to be supporting the hegemonic order of our times. But there are quite simple tricks that we can use to subvert this and to get a different outcome. So all of culture, I'm arguing, is politically contested, and actually the outcome of that contest matters. And I think that we radicals and revolutionaries would do well to recognise that. I actually think that compared to people with huge amounts of power and privilege, we are playing catch-up. Because I think that people with power and privilege, and indeed the state, I think that they have understood the political power of culture for quite some time. You can probably all think of examples of the state shutting down music events. I'll give you a couple. Grime music has, of course, now broken through into the mainstream in a big way. Grime music. But before grime MCs took over the other stage at Glastonbury, before the hashtag Grime for Corbyn helped to revive the fortunes of the Labour Party, before Ed Sheeran was desperate to be seen hanging out with the rising stars of grime, and one of those rising stars, Stormzy, had a #1 album, before all that happened, grime gigs were routinely shut down by the police. Routinely, certainly down where I live in Brixton, and I think that's true across London. And actually a very similar thing happened in the early days of rave, for those old enough to remember. In fact, the Conservative government back then, this was the mid-1990s, the Conservative government actually passed a piece of legislation that specified that any gathering of a certain number of people at which music characterised by repetitive beats is played is now outlawed. That term, repetitive beats, actually entered into British law in 1994. Now, what I discovered when I started to do a bit of research for this book is that this sort of suspicious, antagonistic relationship between the establishment and the music preferred by large numbers of ordinary people, that this sort of relationship has been going on for hundreds, if not thousands, of years. And so, just to make sure that our discussion has a proper historical perspective, I'd like to give you an example, if I may, from 12th century Europe, where the establishment was made up of the popes and the abbots of the Catholic Church and the feudal lords. And this was an establishment that was very worried that ordinary people might rise up and demand a better lot in life. I mean, conditions for most people under feudalism would have been pretty grim after all. And therefore what the establishment did was that they quite aggressively peddled the message that the social order is ordained by God. The implication, of course, being that any attempt to change it was not only futile, but also blasphemous. So don't even think about it. And they used music to reinforce this message. They commissioned composers to compose music which they hoped would encourage their congregations to gaze upward in quiet spiritual contemplation. And they banned any music that they thought might get those same people thinking about worldly pleasures. Now, repetitive beats weren't yet a problem, but they decided that certain combinations of notes were what we musicians call intervals. Certain intervals, they decided, were a serious problem. In fact, the most difficult sounding, the most unsettling sounding, the most dissonant sounding interval. Are there any musicians who know the interval I'm referring to? Do you know what the actual musical term is? The diminished fifth. The diminished fifth was indeed labelled diabolus in musica, the devil in music. For the non-musicians, I brought my guitar along so that you can hear this devilish sound. So prepare to be scared. I'm going to have to shout. I can't. We haven't got a mic stand. So
I can hold it. I can hold it for you. If you
no,
want.
don't worry. No, don't worry. No need. Let me know if you can't hear me at the back. So here we go. The devil's interval. Pretty scary stuff, eh? I mean, the truth, of course, is that our ears are pretty familiar with the sound now. It's actually been used a lot in music in the intervening years. There's loads of examples. People always give examples from the band Black Sabbath. I'm going to give another example. One of my favourites is the beginning of Purple Haze, the Jimi Hendrix song. Let me dial in some gain. By the way, never judge a guitarist by the size of their amplifier. You probably can't hear the amplifier at the back, but never mind. So, you see, Jimmy was playing a B-flat octave. But the bass player was playing an E. So what you heard was the devil's interval. It's also right at the beginning of the theme tune to The Simpsons. But I digress. So that sound was completely taboo in 12th century Europe, completely out of bounds. But you know what? Even the sweet sounding bedrock of Western musical harmony, the third, even this was forbidden. Even that sound. Now, what do you think ordinary people did about these restrictions? Anyone want to hazard a guess? Huh? Yeah, they ignored the restrictions. They completely ignored them. And therefore, precisely the sound of thirds moving in parallel became popular. This sort of thing. But it wouldn't have been on a guitar. It would typically be two voices or two copper horns called lurs. The lure is noteworthy because it's the only instrument that I know of, at least, to have a butter named after it, Lurpak butter. Next time you're in the supermarket, you're going to remember this talk and go and have a look at a pack of Lurpak, and you'll see the instrument there. It's part of the logo. So this musical standoff, you see, so that the thirds moving in parallel, this was, if you like, the rave or the grime of its time, loved by the people, loathed by the rulers. And this musical standoff between the establishment and ordinary people lasted for some 200 years, until famine swept across Europe with plague in its wake. Conditions for ordinary people would have become completely unbearable. And so they did rise up. They started to set fire to the chateau of the feudal lords. They started to refuse to pay money to the church and to the feudal lords, which they had been compelled to do until that point. And so the establishment faced a real crisis. They were more keen than ever before to peddle the message that the social order is ordained by God, but they recognised that that had become a pill too bitter for most people to swallow. And so eventually, and somewhat reluctantly, they agreed to sweeten it by accepting some popular innovations, including those in musical harmony. This was the beginning of the European Renaissance. You could at last use the third in official church compositions. Now that really set the stage for the whole canon of Western classical music that would follow. But you see this sort of thing happening time and time again. You see an establishment who are somewhat nervous about ordinary people and who therefore try to restrict and control the music of ordinary people. And often we see ordinary people coming up with ingenious ways to get around those restrictions. I'll give you another example, and that is carnival. Notting Hill Carnival, of course, coming up soon. Next month, we've got the Notting Hill Carnival. Now, the Notting Hill Carnival has its roots in the Trinidadian Carnival. And Trinidad still has one of the biggest, and in my opinion, one of the best carnivals in the world. If ever you get the chance to go to Trinidad at carnival time, seize the opportunity. You'll have an absolute blast. Most people enjoy carnival these days, most people. 150 years ago, the British colonial authority hated it. They hated it. They saw it as a very powerful symbolic challenge to their authority, and they decided that they were going to stop it. It's exactly what they tried to do in 1881. Captain Baker and his troops went flying in with the truncheons out, but the carnival goers fought back, and eventually, after several hours of clashes, the police were pushed back and carnival was saved. It's now referred to and celebrated on the island as the Cambule riot of 1881. That word, by the way, Cambule, that's what carnival was called at the time. When I was asking around in Trinidad, people seemed to think that it probably came from the French can brûler, meaning burnt cane. Can brûler, because what would happen is the carnival goers would set fire to the sugarcane, the crop that for many of them would have represented their oppression, and then they would parade into town in celebration. So, as you can imagine, the rulers were none too pleased. Their attempts to stop carnival had been thwarted. There was too much popular resistance. They needed a new strategy. They came up with one 2 years later, 1883. They decided that it was impossible to take on the whole of carnival, but what they would do is ban the musical heart of carnival. And at that time, the musical heart of carnival was like a djembe-style skin drum. It was a drum. They banned drums. Now, the Trinidadian musicians are a resourceful lot. They thought to themselves, OK, you've banned drums, we'll simply find an alternative. And they found the alternative growing in abundance all around them on the islands of Trinidad and Tobago. Bamboo. They found that if they cut a length of bamboo and banged it on the floor and then hit it with a stick, they got a pretty good approximation of a drum sound. I've got a bit of video, which is a modern-day reenactment of these bamboo bands. I'm going to play you a short excerpt, just so that you know I'm not making this stuff up. Have a quick look and listen to this. So bamboo became the new sound of carnival again. Do you want to hit the lights for me? Can you be my LD, my lighting designer? Thank you. So again, as you can imagine, the authorities were none too pleased. Their attempts this time to derail carnival had again been gotten around. And so they passed this piece of legislation and that piece of legislation. You can't dance any longer in a profane way. You can't sing certain songs, particularly those that are rude about the upper classes. And then, in the 1930s, they banned bamboo. Now, Then there was the outbreak of the Second World War. The authorities used the outbreak of the Second World War to at least temporarily stop carnival. And that gave the Trinidadian musicians a chance to get together and to have a think. They thought to themselves, OK, you've banned drums, now you've banned bamboo, what's next? And they noticed that the American Navy, who leased large parts of the island during the Second World War, they noticed that the Navy was starting to litter the island with a huge number of oil drums. You probably know where the story's going. By the Victory in Europe celebrations of 1945, something very similar to the now much loved tuned steel pan was revealed to amazed revellers. The very existence of the instrument underlines our indefatigable desire to express ourselves through music, even when we're facing quite harsh political repression. I look at a number of other case studies in the book. I look at the way that music was used by the CIA during the Cold War. I look at the way that music was used by the dictators of the 20th century. I tell the rather disturbing story of Yanis Xenakis, the Romanian-born Greek composer. And then coming into the 21st century, I talk about the significance, as I see it, of shows like X Factor, Pop Idol, The Voice. I talk about the significance, as I see it, of the growth in popularity of music festivals, like Glastonbury. I talk about Beyoncé and her nod of solidarity towards the Black Lives Matter movement last year. And I also talk about the music of the Arab revolutions of 2010, 2011. And the last of the little stories that I would like to share with you during this introductory talk, I'm going to take from that chapter, if that's okay, because I think it's kind of an important story. The chapter begins, as the short-lived Arab Spring did, begins in Tunisia and it ends in Syria. And in Syria we find a full-voiced firefighter and part-time poet, a guy called Ibrahim al-Kashush, singing in the town square of Hama, one of the big cities in Syria. And he's singing a song that he's written in what I am told is a traditional Levantine folk form. It's a kind of a call and response form, perfect for asserting political demands. The performance took place on the 27th of June 2011, and somebody held up a phone and filmed it. You can't really see Ibrahim al-Kashush, but you can most certainly hear him. So I'll play you a bit of that performance. Yeah, there's a translation which runs along the bottom, but if anyone can't make it out, it's kind of predictable stuff. I mean, every single line is laying into the regime of Bashar al-Assad, who of course is still in power in Syria. Do you want to hit the lights again, perhaps? Thanks. Ibrahim al-Kashush. Now, it's important to me that when I talk about this book, that I present the most accurate possible information to you. And therefore, I've got one correction to the translation. I was doing a book event in West London, and an Arabic speaker told me that where it says ass, the original word is closer to fart. So I just want you to know that. So that was filmed on the 27th of June 2011. The regime responded quite quickly. On the 4th of July, just a few days later, the body of Ibrahim al-Kashouch washed up on the shores of the Orontes River, which runs through the city. And it was quite clear from the way in which he'd been murdered that he had been murdered precisely because of the performance that we just saw. Now, I felt that it was important to include that story in my book because some people have said to me, Dave, music doesn't really change the world. The best that musicians do is provide a soundtrack while other people go out and try to change the world. And very often that's true. Very often that is all, or perhaps the best, that some musicians do. But what the music of the Arab revolutions reminds us of is that sometimes music and musicians are absolutely central to critical moments of mass struggle. They can help to give some confidence to long oppressed people. They can help to cohere people around a set of political demands. And some of them have paid the highest possible price for their courage. I'm going to wrap up soon, but let me say this. Okay, let me say this. The book isn't just a series of case studies. I do actually try to draw out the threads that run through all of them, and I do try to arrive at some conclusions. And therefore, the penultimate chapter is my Rebel Music Manifesto. A set of ideas, really, a set of suggestions about the sorts of things we might consider doing in order to ensure that music enriches the lives of all of us rather than simply lines the pockets of the few. As I mentioned before, I've tried to make the book entertaining and accessible. I mean, I hope you'll consider taking a look at it. I do actually want people not only to, have a look at the book, but to join in with this conversation. I mean, the best outcome, so far as I'm concerned, is if this book helps to, contribute to and also perhaps stimulate a conversation about this stuff, about the political power of culture. Because it seems to me that the better we understand the way that culture operates politically, the better we understand the mechanisms at work, the better place we will be to consciously intervene and to get a better result. We'll be in a much better place to start to create the kind of culture which I think that we deserve and that we badly need at the moment. So I'm looking forward to hearing what your thoughts are. But for now, I want to thank you very much for listening. Thank you.
Okay. Yeah, hello. I was a youth in the 70s and 80s, and in the black community, we had roots reggae, and we had the sound systems, which were transported from whatever venues we could find in people's houses or wherever we could get a place, and it taught to us the youth in the music. It was very political, and it gave us a message. Say, for instance, about South Africa. There were many musicians of the day. There was like Black Uhura and Culture, as well as Bob Marley. And it taught us about the political situations going on in Jamaica, in England, everywhere. So it gave us a really good insight. And a lot of us now, we're politically aware because of the music back in the day. And they told us about South Africa, about simple things like not buying grapes in South Africa and things. So it was a really good time to be a youth, and we had fun as well. So, but my children today, my young ones, they I don't like the music they have now. Yes, it is. It is, and I play a bit of guitar myself, and the music now is, when I listen to it, the beats makes the children aggressive. The lyrics are not good. There's nothing political for them to focus on. Yeah, that's about it, really.
Look, I'd recommend Dave's book. There's fantastic examples. He didn't have enough time to go through all of just how contested music is. Throughout hundreds and thousands of years, you've had the establishment trying to use music as a form of social control, but they've never had it their own way. The truth is, as Dave's given examples to, there's been a level of resistance to racism and other forms of oppression through music. Civil rights and the steel pan example Dave gave were two of my favourites, but this process was also happening in Britain in the 1970s. If you look at 1976, before the launch of Rock Against Racism, it wasn't just a Trinidad carnival the police were attacking, it was the Notting Hill Carnival in 1976, at a time when the National Front were on the rise, when we had racist attacks, when we had disillusionment between of black and white youth. We saw the rise of underground music, of reggae and punk, and it was absolutely crucial that time. Red Saunders, Roger Huddle and many others pulled that progressive music into a movement that could both tackle racism and argue for progressive change. I think we have to learn for that tradition today. Dave talked about Grenfell Corbyn. There's been an absolute fantastic politicisation. We see Stormzy arguing for Grenfell in Glastonbury. Absolutely fantastic potential for progressive political change. It's up to us, I think, and organisations on the left to pull that together in a united movement against racism and oppression and argue for progressive politics. Because let's be absolutely clear, I'm excited by Jeremy Corbyn and what that represents. But let's be absolutely clear, the establishment will use racism as a massive tool to divide people. I think what we're going to certainly try and do with Love Music Hate Racism is to pull that progressive force that can drive back against racism and push for progressive change. Just one plug, Dave's absolutely right about the root of Carnival. It started around a message of anti-racism. It's exactly the same in the Notting Hill Carnival. We want that message to be loud and clear this year. Join us on Sunday 27th of April, Love Music Hate Racism. We're going to have a float at the Notting Hill Carnival this year. Thank you.
I just want to say that I think a lot can be said about music now and how it can be disconnected from politics, but I don't think that's my experience of music. I think I went to a gig recently in North London with a band called Shame, and they walked on to Fuck the Police by NWA and then stood on the stage and said, if there are any Tories in the room, fuck off, never come back, we don't want to see you at any of our gigs. And actually there's a movement in London amongst rock bands of politics becoming part of the discussion. Bands like Wolf Alice and Peace, who were on the demo on the 1st of July, the Girls Against as well, which is a movement against groping at gigs that was endorsed massively by bands that have come out of the London scene. Underground rock music, and I think there's actually a big opportunity for Love Music Hate Racism to get those bands involved and to create again a really big movement around music and politics and uniting the two, because I think the bands are there, the ideas are there, and if you go to gigs, that's what's being talked about and that's what people are saying. So I think there's a really big opportunity at the moment.
I have to shake your hands. Basil Gabden, founder member of Steel Pulse. Yo. Yeah, you know, I'm not a politician, but we've been doing music now or been involved in politics for a lot of years, yeah. And we started out, as the lady said earlier, we started around, when I was around 15, 16, there was this music of Bob Marley and the Wailers, and it kind of changed our perspective on the whole world, really, because it brought religion into it. In a sense, religion, I'm a bit dubious about saying, particular religion is one faith or the other, people do what they want. But what Rasta did is kind of, it helped to focus kids in our community to think positive, instead of going to the blues and stabbing up the next man and cussing the next man, people start to work together. And for me, like what Dave said about the power of music, I think he's absolutely right. And, it does make positive movements if we use it properly. I mean, you've had people like Eric Clapton who were, he had a lot of music. He learned a lot of his stuff from blues and black music and ended up being very discriminatory, wasn't he? Yeah. So I do, believe in what you're saying, and I'd love a free copy of your book. But, no, only kidding. Yeah, I love what you're saying. And I thought I had to come up and say something. Thank you again. Thank you.
Person in the glasses and then the person who's just come up. So you're next.
Yeah, I think it's really important how you use music, because I too was involved around Rock Against Racism, a young kid up in Camden, and you saw punk arrive as a scream of rage. But what I initially saw was it's very nihilistic, and a lot of people with Nazi iconography. I mean, Susie and the Banshees and playing at the Roundhouse and that sort of stuff. And we had to intervene. And you could intervene as an individual by picking fights with people with swastikas and hair lips and telling them they'd be made into soap and whatever. But then we got Rock Against Racism that came through, and it gave us the materials that we could intervene with, and it fundamentally changed things. I think we're all, in a way, we're fortunate that there is something about music that gets to people that the right can't stand. I mean, when we were, it was still tough going in 76, 77, but when we got the leader of the National Front, which was the main Nazi party in Britain at the time, to say we must eliminate jungle rhythms from our popular music, which was a phrase that he picked up from the anti-rock and roll stuff in the 50s. But when he said that, I knew we were going to win. I mean, I didn't know it was going to be easy, but I knew we were going to win, because all the kids that I'd been at school with who danced to James Brown and then go out packy bashing and whatever, they weren't going to lose their music. They weren't going to lose their music. So we could build that movement. Then we couldn't. It wasn't just about music. It was about the Anti-Nazi League on the streets. I was a socialist worker then, and still a socialist worker now. And it was about having something positive to say. And I think again, it's brilliant. I was really sorry the comrade who said there's no political music today. I'm really pleased what you said. I don't hear the political music by and large, but I'm 62. I'm listening to the wrong stuff in the wrong generation. But my kids do. My kids do, and that's good. That's good for me. The music reflects reality. Reality comes back in politics. I love music, hate racism. Reborn. It's not a mirror image, a carbon copy of Rock Against Racism, but we need it everywhere. We need it everywhere. We need it in all the colleges. We need the big events, but we need the grassroots stuff that we had again. Because the real change in culture that happened in Britain in the 70s, I think, mainly came out of the grassroots. The big carnivals were great, but the RA clubs were bad.
I'd just like to echo some of the things that Basil had said in regards to that era, that time, whereby the messages were actually very important for us as a generation, and they were actually quite clear and in no way muddied. I think that generation that's come through now, what we really have to understand with the younger people is that they are actually listening to a lot of the same messages, but in their own music, they're actually codified. And many youth movements are actually commodified as they go along. If you look at the original skinheads are actually young working class English people who actually, I guess, deified our parents and really worshipped our parents in a way that they imitated them. And they took on a lot of the tenets of our beliefs. But there was a successive generations were actually diverted from the original message. So they took on the artifacts of the skinhead, and then they actually reflected something very different. And what you generally do see with youth movements is that they start off very positively, and then the successive generations probably misunderstand. And what I'm saying is that, particularly with young people, there's always an issue of rebellion. Our generation was very rebellious. So our parents didn't really understand what we were actually contested against in our schools, in employment, and in the streets, and were resistant to us. But we took a lot of what we saw taking place in South Africa, the actual rebellion movement that took place at the 1976 carnival, came as a direct result of what we saw taking place in Soweto. And we took those as our leaders, and we did exactly as we saw them doing. We were actually more successful in some because we didn't have the shambok here. So we turned over 2 police car, beat 2 police boys, stoned 2 helicopter. We loved it, and we were showing them that that's what they could also take on, even though they were in a very much more an extreme situation than we were. But we understand that the young people of today are actually in a worse place than we were then, because the enemy is actually, he has a lot more weapons at his disposal at this point in time. And we need to understand that what we do is try to spoon feed them, that we don't try to take over their movement, that we actually tell them that we are with you, but you actually have to show us exactly what you need to do, what we need to do for you. So love music, hate racism, forward. Thank you.
So the next speaker will be the comrade in the tan shirt.
Right, yeah, John Parrington from Oxford. Yeah, I sort of tentatively say this because I'd like to say a bit about kind of mainstream middle-of-the-road music and what it might have to offer, because in our house we listen to a lot of Radio 1, mainly because my children are 15, 11, and it's the one kind of common denominator. And in some ways, I mean, there is actually some interesting stuff on Radio 1 if you listen late enough, some quite cutting-edge stuff, but we also listen to The Breakfast Show, and that in some ways might seem to personify the most kind of dumbed down kind of middle of the road manufactured pop. This is all the product of things like these talent shows. So it's bands like Little Mix that have come out with this talent spotting thing. And it might seem like there's nothing at all to offer, but I actually find some of it quite interesting. Really. So my daughter is 11, and her favourite band is Little Mix. And one of their songs recently is called Power, and it's actually a collaboration with Stormzy, and it's got some quite interesting lyrics. I mean, one of the lyrics is, I may take it down south, but that doesn't mean I'm going to take it lying down. I mean, it's basically all about saying that just because you're a woman and we've been defined as a sort of passive object, you're not going to put up with that. And that, I think for little girls who are listening to that kind of music, that's actually quite a powerful statement. I think the other thing that's kind of interesting about radio, one of the ways it's evolved over the last few years is there's been a shift, I think, in attitudes, about sexism and LGBT rights and things like that. I mean, if you think only a few years ago, Chris Moyles was able to come out and say that, use gay as a derogative word. Now there's an openly gay DJ who fronts the morning show, Nick Grimm's show, and they're always talking about, gay issues in a very positive way. So I think that's kind of important. I think the other thing we've got to think about is, to what extent can we influence that kind of more mainstream pop rather than the kind of stuff that, maybe more cutting edge, maybe less known about? Because, I mean, it's interesting in some ways that you've got artists that, like Storms, that have come out obviously of the grime movement was much more kind of marginalised at one time, now is much more heard on stations like Radio 1 in the morning. But you've also even seen a shift with people like Ed Sheeran. I mean, Ed Sheeran's probably the ultimate, isn't he, in middle of the road kind of, manufactured music. But, the fact is, only a few years ago, he was David Cameron was a good guy. And now I hear that he's now back in, love music, hate racism. I think that's a good sign myself. But I'd be interested to know what the speaker thinks about this whole business of manufacturing pop and what I've said.
Right, following the next speaker, it'll be you, and then I haven't had any more indications, so I'd really encourage people to indicate because we do have a bit more time.
Yeah, cheers for the talk, and I will be buying a book about it. Obviously, it's free. That's brilliant. And thanks for the album Handsworth Revolution. That was absolutely brilliant, inspirational. Amazing. But I wanted to talk about this sort of commodification of music, because one of the most depressing times in the evening is when there's a break in a film or something like that, and up comes an advert, and the backing track is your favourite song from way back when, or Johnny Rotten's advertising Country File Butter or something like that. It's absolute disgrace. But this was from music that at one time used to be, as they used to say, threatening the very foundations of civilization. These movements in music, and it's a relationship between music and the movement. They attack the music, but it's actually the movement that they're getting at. They want to break that. And I think it's when the movement goes away, that's when that they can commodify and take on board the music itself. And I think that's the sort of relationship. But the music in the middle of a movement can take on the ideas and reinforce them and reflect them back and stuff like that. And we can have a good time dancing to them, which is absolutely wonderful. And I think I'll just leave it there. Cheers.
Thank you.
Right, and following you it'll be, yeah, excellent, yeah.
I'm not quite sure I'm going to say this, but I love black and white music, and most of the great music has been coming from Africa to America as a result of slavery, and resulted in Blue Note and Robert Johnson on the Crossroads with his guitar being tuned by the devil. And he said, if you don't hear this, if you haven't heard the sound, I hope you never will. I love the sound of the blues. My music teacher says it causes a resonance, and it's a fantastic sound. I don't think it's depressing, and that's led to jazz, and it's like the black person's the American classical music, and I know you talked about the Devil's Interval. I didn't come here at the start. I don't know if you mentioned the blues particularly, apart from Jimi Hendrix. Anyway, that'll do. I'm just trying to say all the best to Billy Bragg, wherever he is.
And then you're next.
Well, yeah, by the way, thanks for the Still Pulse concert, the Electric Circus in 1977, Manchester nightclub. I enjoyed myself a great deal, so thank you. But I wanted to ask something a bit more serious. It's about, you mentioned dictators, and during World War II, you know, the 30s and 40s, Hitler used Wagner to promote the Nazi regime, the Bayreuth Festival. And like Wagner was like a socialist. He had anti-Semitic tendencies, but he was a, you know, he had a cultural high ideals, and so Hitler and the Nazis, they used Wagner, the Bayreuth Festival, you know, posh opera house to promote their regime. And I was just wondering, what do you think of the musicians who aided and abetted Hitler? I mean, like those, I think a guy called Herbert von Karajan, and he liked the Berlin Philharmonic, and then after he played for the Nazis during the war.
And British Strats, most famously.
Yeah, and then after he was like forgiven, and like used to see in classical music shops, you know, his name on records. So I think, you know, when you see like bands like Screwdriver and all that, I mean, it's not unknown for Nazis to take over things like rock music and then to try and use rock music as a medium to promote their fascist, racist ideals. Okay?
Yep.
You'll be our next speaker, and then the woman here.
Hi, I'm Will. I come from Oxford, but originally I come from Indonesia. And I grew up in the 90s during the dictatorship of our second president, Suharto. So back then, three first albums from Manic Street Preachers really means a lot to me. They saved my life and shaped my political views until today. Thank you.
And following the next speaker will be the comrade in the blue checked shirt.
Hi, first I just wanted to thank you. It's the second time I've seen the talk. Saw it on bookmarks. I think I probably enjoyed it just as much, if not more, this time. But I also wanted to thank the comrade who made the contribution about Little Mix, because I hate them. I always go on, I can't stand anything about them, and I didn't realise, because I don't follow their music, I didn't realise that they were kind of beginning to address those issues. But it made me think about, like, you see how you mentioned Beyonce, and you did a talk last year about formation. And yeah, I kind of had a question about it, because I feel that although I commend her for giving a nod to the movement, I think it's something that really does need to happen. I kind of wonder how much we should endorse it as socialist revolutionaries, because we kind of believe that the root of all oppression, well, we believe that the root of all oppression stems from capitalism. So whilst it's good that you're giving recognition and giving a voice to these movements, which it deserves, if you're not really saying, if you're not tackling the root, if you're not actually going to solve it through what you're saying, then, you know, how much I'm just kind of wondering if you get, I mean, like how much are we meant to say well done to you if they're not? Yeah, thank you.
Thank you for the talk. I think it's very good. I think it's very difficult now for the establishment to ban music as it is, but I just want to say it's important to protest and not to play music. And that's why I urge all musicians and socialists, to all musicians, not to play in Israel until the Palestinians are free. Shame on Radiohead, shame on the Israelis, and shame.
And then the following speaker will be the person in the green shirt in the middle.
It's a coincidence that I'm coming up after that gentleman, because I was going to just say a little bit about music as identity and as culture, and I'm not thinking about UK, I was actually thinking about Palestine and how Palestinians are portrayed in a very one-dimensional way, but there is a huge rich culture of Palestinian music which is not allowed to be, in a way. So if you have chances to promote, in fact I'm going to plug, because there is 12 young Palestinians jazz musicians that are playing, they're on a tour at the moment in the UK, but if you do have chance to listen, promote Palestinian music or music of other cultures where people are striving to be whole people within the context of struggle. There's that aspect of themselves that doesn't want to die, that won't die, but it's done against tremendous oppression. So anything that you can do is great. Thank you.
Right, and you'll be next.
Thanks. I haven't fully got it formulated in my head, so just like bear with me a bit. But like, what we've sort of been talking about here really is about how music and culture is a sort of like to and fro between who it is who's trying to claim it and for what movement and for what ends. So you've got the, the way in which working class people, ordinary people, are able to use it as a form of resistance, as a form of solidarity and unity, and really pulling together disparate parts of communities in the wake of either tragedy, like the Notting Hill Carnival, and being able to pull people together after race riots and so on, or whether it's fighting fascism and stuff like that as well. Or then on the other hand, where you've got the ruling class who's trying to use music to pacify it, to be able to sell on a mass scale, to make a huge amount of profit, because that's all that really capitalism seeks to do. And I wanted to the reason I put my hand up, because I wanted to come back on a point that you raised about like the artists who tap into that sort of mood of resistance, and like whether or not they're actually involved in it and want it to be good or not. And it made me think about like Beyonce and releasing Lemonade, and her sort of nod towards the Black Lives Matter movement and stuff like that, and how much she's actually a part of it, or how much she's just very aware of being a really good businesswoman and reflecting the people who predominantly buy her music and who she can relate to. And it also got me thinking, like, does it actually really matter? Because at the end of the day, if she, on the platform which she has, is able to promote those ideas because she either feels that it's popular or because she's been pushed so far that she has to say it, really means that actually we're on the front foot, and we should actually be quite proud of that, to get Little Mix talking about the rights of women to be able to choose what they want to wear and so on. I think it's an incredible thing. Like, if we've got artists like Stormzy who are taking, absolutely taking the charts by storm. There wasn't really any pun intended there. But, that's a massive step in the right direction, and really this is the beginning of a time when we can actually be able to reclaim working class music, reclaim music which we can begin to create, because you can feel the sense of a mass movement and confidence with, people getting behind Jeremy Corbyn, with the attacks on Muslims and refugees and the resistance to it as well. But I'll just leave it there. We should be confident we're on the front foot and we're making them say what we're all thinking.
The speaker talked about music being banned. There's a really good example of a really recent song that was banned, and that was the week before the election. The People's Assembly had, I'm a member of the Socialist Workers' Party, by the way, the People's Assembly had a demonstration, small demonstration outside the BBC, because in the play, running playoff, or what do you call it, sorry, of the of the top 10, they wouldn't play number 5, which was a song about Theresa May being a liar. And basically it showed how frightened the authorities are of some things to do with music. When I was a young woman, I used to go to Specials, Madness, Selector concerts all the time. I was what I would describe as a two-tone skinhead, a good skinhead who liked ska, not a racist. And the lyrics in some of the Special songs and other things then, they weren't banned on Radio 1, but the lyrics of this song in the run-up to the election, which showed how frightened they were of the politicisation of people, they were banned. It couldn't be played. They actually came out and they read out a little statement explaining why the song couldn't be played, because it was biased. We had all of the political bias and the absolute onslaught of a disgusting nature of political commentator after political commentator against Corbyn in the run-up to the election, and yet a song which actually referred to Theresa May as being a liar couldn't be played because that was politically biased. And that just shows you how frightened the authorities and the establishment can be sometimes of music tapping in absolutely to a political fight back against the establishment.
Next it will be the comrade at the back, and then I probably do still have time for one more to sneak in if anyone's...
Just to follow up from what Kathy said, actually, there is a clause in the BBC around elections to do with music and propaganda that does allow you to do those songs if there's an equal song that criticises the other side as well. So if there's any bands out there that want to do a Jeremy Corbyn's a liar, then good luck with that. But that is actually a sort of rule, I think, that goes back to Reithian times. Anyway, I just want to address something that the young comrade, female comrade, said earlier about music and being political and how you can justify it. And this particularly was acute when I was young, when the Clash signed to CBS, which was considered a complete capitulation to capitalism and a complete sellout. Of course, what it did do is it took it out of the clubs at the West End and made it accessible and open to everyone in the country, and thus caused the real explosion of punk, which was then called New Wave, and made that music and that politics. I mean, I learned everything I first knew about the Spanish Civil War from Joe Strummer on London Calling. So, you know, these things are really important. But I think the bottom line is not to get confused and mixed up in this whole idea about what is political with a capital P and what isn't. And I think, you know, talking about making things into drums, every time I've ever read anything by Adorno from the Frankfurt School, I want to hit the book so hard that it sounds like a drum, because he rejects everything he doesn't think comes from a completely pure Marxist perspective, and I find that so incredibly annoying. And I just think that, you know, I mean, I think like Aretha Franklin could get up and sing, "My wardrobe door used to be yellow, but I painted it green this morning," and to me that's a political statement, do you know what I mean? Because it comes from Aretha Franklin. Anything she said to me is political, because she's a strong black woman getting up and saying that. And I think we have to look at how politics is used and how we use the politics as well. The whole universal use of the term man, when people refer to each other as like, "Hello, how are you, man?" comes from jazz musicians in Denver in the 1930s who were sick of being called boy. So they started referring to each other as man. So the universal acceptance of that comes from a musical phenomenon that's not particularly political, except it is political, but it's not political with a big P. And I think we have to welcome anything, no matter who says it, if it's a statement against racism, but it doesn't matter where it comes from, because that makes it easier for us to argue. And anything that gets accepted by mainstream musicians or mainstream actors that makes our job easier in fighting racism and sexism and all the rest of it, we should be fully behind and support.
Thank you. The next speaker will be...
Right, I'm Richard, I'm from Cambridge SWP, I'm also a teacher, but I also in my spare time run a little record label and put on gigs, which I've done for 20 or so years, and I did that to start with just because of love of music, not to be particularly political, but it has become really obvious if you want to build an anti-racist movement that one way of good way of doing it is through music. So over 20 years there's been quite a lot of rebel bands that have carried on with politics, even though you might not know it if you read the mainstream media. I mean, it's not a very good way of making money, it's a good way of losing a lot of money unless you're really careful. But
I think it is definitely something worth doing. I'm quite proud that a whole generation of indie bands in Cambridge have grown up thinking that anti-racism is the natural way to be, and that venues in Cambridge won't put on any gigs that have got anything that are slightly racist with them. And I think I was very proud that Strawberry Fair this year, which is a big free festival in Cambridge, the biggest one-day free festival in Britain actually, had a Love Music, Hate Racism area that we organised with loads of young bands and more mature bands playing, and that area actually became a political hub of the whole fair, with campaigns for the NHS and education and against the war and so on, all putting stalls in our area, and it became so popular that the candidates for Parliament all wanted to come and speak at it and so on. I think it did make a difference. So I'd say if you think that you can use music to help organise people, do. There's lots of young people out there who are creative and never get a platform, they don't get their creativity acknowledged, they want to do something more exciting, the X Factor, but they don't often have that platform. I think you're knocking an open door, really, and if you want to do that, I mean, I was inspired by the Manics as well, the speaker at the back. If you want to do that, I think the tips in Dave's book are actually a really good place to start. And as I say, bands are desperate to play. It's an easy thing to do if you can sort yourself out.
And this will be our final speaker.
Good evening, everyone. I am Zara Sykes. I'm a musician from Birmingham. And the reason I'm here today is due to Love Music, Hate Racism. I did the Birmingham show in February, and kind of from there, it's been a very interesting journey for myself as a musician, but also in thinking how important kind of your message can be and stuff like that. And I'll just say, obviously today was I didn't know why I've come up. I think I was encouraged to come up out from so I didn't know exactly what I was going to say, so I'm here and I'm kind of going with the flow of how I feel. But just today it's been very inspiring for me, because I think one thing I've gotten out of the whole of the day is that the struggle is real. The struggle is really real, and actually, regardless of kind of when we're talking about the different oppressions, oppression is oppression, and you know, it is the working class people who are almost targeted, you know what I mean? And like, I suppose all we can do is try, innit? Do you know what I mean? Try to make a change, try to make a difference, because, you know, and the struggle has actually been there since the beginning of time as well. It's not new. It's been there always. So I'm learning, you know, I didn't even know what SWP was properly and stuff like that. So I'm learning as we go along what's. So thank you for, obviously this event. And obviously thank you as well for, you inspired me with your Trinidadian story as well. That was deep. So thank you.
The first thing to say is that anyone who played at the Rock Against Racism Carnival in Victoria Park in 1970, when was it, 6? 8, hang on, it started Rock Against Racism. 8, anyone who played gets a free copy. That offer, limited to 1 copy, first come, first served. So look, let me quickly say a few words. I mean, it's important to understand the context of Rock Against Racism. It was the first wave of neoliberal politics that led to a situation where people were angry and the ruling classes were trying to turn us one against another. And it's absolutely right that Eric Clapton fell for that and made this appalling racist outburst while on stage at Birmingham Odeon. The IMF had lent money to Jim Callaghan's Labour government, and Labour was pushing through austerity. And of course, it's a period of austerity that we're living through now, and I agree that LMHR is very much needed. A few other things about Rock Against Racism. I mean, it's important to remember that wasn't the only show in town when it comes to music and politics. There were similarly political records coming out all around the world, quite often for similar reasons. I mean, let's not forget that Exodus, the Bob Marley album, had come out, around that time, I think the year before The Clash released their first record. Fela Kuti's Zombie, a very political record coming out of Nigeria. So, you know, let's not think that The Clash and punk is the only game in town. But certainly Rock Against Racism was fantastically important, and the way it brought predominantly reggae and punk bands together was symbolically very important and very effective, but what made it most effective, and one of the contributions referred to this, what made it most effective was that it was connecting musicians directly to political campaigns and indeed political organisation. And one of the things I argue in the book is that political movements, including political organisations, are fantastically important to really and truly to all of the high points in terms of music and politics converging. I won't have time to go into it now, but I give examples including Strange Fruit, the song made famous by Billie Holiday, and also the impact that Free Nelson Mandela had, the Special AKA song. We talked a bit about South Africa in the discussion, but the point here is that without political organisations, you wouldn't have had the impact that made those moments in popular music and politics so famous and so effective. So, you know, political organisation is very, very important, and actually the artists who remain politically relevant tend to be the ones who make the effort to stay in touch with political movements. So that's fantastically important, something that I argue through the book. And of course I do talk about Rock Against Racism in some detail, and I would recommend Red and Roger's book as well. Now, talking of South Africa, this connects with the discussion about Palestine, doesn't it? Because of course, back in the 80s, people were calling for a cultural boycott of South Africa. And if I had been touring at the time, I would have supported that. I think that was the right call. Now, Palestinian civil society is calling for a boycott, a cultural boycott of Israel, well, as part of a broader boycott, divestment and sanctions movement. And I think it's very important to understand this and to be able to explain it in very simple terms, why it's right that we should support the cultural boycott of Israel. Because you sometimes hear people arguing, you know, why is Israel being singled out when there are so many rotten regimes all around the world? And very often they're kind of trying to make the implicit suggestion that you're doing it because you have anti-Semitic ideas or something like that. It's a completely unjust, unfair and misleading allegation, so we need to be able to explain the boycott. Cultural boycotts are not a political principle to be applied all the time in every situation. It's a political tactic. And usually it would be the wrong tactic. So, for example, I completely disagree with the regime in Bahrain. But to say I'm not going to play there doesn't really make a lot of sense if I've never been asked to play there in the first place. It's a bit meaningless. There are two criteria that need to be fulfilled for a cultural boycott to be the right political tactic. The first is that people on the sharp end have to be asking for it. The people actually suffering from the oppression have to be asking for it, and not just one or two of them, but, you know, a democratically constituted body representing civil society. That's happened. That's happened. The Boycott National Committee represents Palestinian civil society. That's what they want us to do. That's the act of solidarity they've asked for. And secondly, it needs to have some chance of being effective, of bringing about some progressive change. And I believe that's certainly the case. It's a good way to raise these issues, these important issues. The whole discussion around Radiohead deciding to ignore the boycott gives us opportunities to talk about some very important issues with a broad audience. You know, this question has come up in the pages of the NME, not a publication which these days gets political very often. So I do support the boycott of the cultural boycott of Israel. I was proud to be one of the signatories to the letter asking Radiohead to change their mind, and actually I thought that Tom York's response to Rolling Stone was embarrassingly weak. I mean, it really showed how out of touch he is on this question. I thought he came across as arrogant, very disappointing. So that's the question of cultural boycott, and of course those criteria were met in South Africa back in the day, and cultural boycott played an important role back then. Okay, somebody, where are we? Somebody asked about manufactured pop. Now I do talk about really the most manufactured format of all at the moment, which is the talent TV show, isn't it? It's the kind of The Voice and X Factor and things like that. And I had to think about this for a little while, because there are examples of people getting through, appearing on TV, and therefore accessing a mass audience, people who wouldn't ordinarily have been let through by the traditional gatekeepers of the music industry. And I thought maybe there's something progressive about that. I mean, probably the most dramatic example was a guy called what was it? I can't remember his first name. Asaf. He was a Palestinian from Gaza who won Arab Idol, I think, in 2014. And he spoke about the issues that had affected him and was quite political. He used the platform in quite a political way. So I thought, well, maybe there's something good about the format of these shows. Maybe they're a bit more democratic than the old corporate music industry. But in the end, I changed my mind, because if you look at the format, what you've got is this fetishisation of competition. Why does it always have to be a competition? Music shouldn't be about competing with one another. Okay, that's the first thing, fetishisation of competition. Whoever wins the competition, the money goes to the same already huge rich corporations, because in order to enter the competition you have to sign an exclusive contract with those big companies. And then you've got this veneer of democracy because people get to vote, but of course how we vote and who we get to vote for, that's completely controlled by an unelected panel of experts. So if you think about it, the X Factor Voice format mirrors a lot of what's worst about the capitalist system as a whole. And on that basis, I don't think it has a lot to offer, although some of the people who come through that show will be very good. On the question of Beyonce, how am I for time? 1 minute?
3 minutes.
Okay. On the question of Beyonce, yeah, I do talk about Beyonce in the book, hopefully in a nuanced way that you would agree with. I mean, what I say is that the discussion around Beyonce's performance of Formation at the Super Bowl last year largely missed the point, because the discussion tended to focus on her motives. Was she being sincere about this, or was this opportunistic, and was it ridiculous that she's talking about the plight of poor African American communities while wearing a $3,000 Gucci dress? So it was about her motives. But actually, I think that either way, whatever her motives were, she felt either able to give her some credit. She finally had permission to talk about issues that mattered, or it became considered expedient by her team to talk about those issues. So, whatever you think of her motives, and we can only speculate, the fact of the matter is that something changed in April 2016. Now, what I believe changed was, what I think changed the whole cultural and political landscape in the US were the successes of the Black Lives Matter movement and the broader movement for social and economic justice. In other words, it came from the streets. That movement of the streets had reached such a critical mass that Beyonce either felt able or felt that it was expedient to reference it. So again, the emphasis is on the movement, the political movement. It's all about the political movements and the political organisations associated with those movements. What else do I need to touch on? Well, simply to say this, really, when it comes to new music, I mean, I think people have already spoken about this. I think there's always been fantastically exciting, overtly political music. I think that's always been the case, and that's also true all around the world. But there's certainly plenty of exciting artists around at the moment. Now, they're not going to emerge fully politically formed. They'll say some good things and some bad things. The point is to have a discussion, to have a debate. Something you can do directly with the artist now, thanks to social media. You can sort of you can say why you think that Radiohead shouldn't be going to Tel Aviv in a week's time. You can start to have the discussion in a way that will be noticed. I mean, I know from my own personal experience that even quite famous artists do pay attention to their Facebook and their Twitter feed and so on. But also with fans, if there are some misogynistic lyrics in that young people are listening to, have a conversation. Don't tell them you shouldn't listen to that music. Don't ever say that. But just say, yeah, this music is great, but how do you feel about these lyrics? Are they problematic for you? So don't patronise young people. Don't tell them what they should and shouldn't be listening to. Instead, have a respectful political discussion with those people. That's the best way forward, I think. That's it from me. Thank you so much for a brilliant discussion. Thank you.